retail marketer. I don't do that for a living, but those are the kinds of things that I would suspect that is probably happening now. They're probably trying to fill the rest of their space. And then probably I would next go to the businesses that are in the mall, and the Pulse Mall, or perhaps the Eastside Marketplace, and try to solicit those businesses. Whether or not they're going to be successful in doing any of that, I don't know. Whether or not that will even be a strategy that they try, I don't know. I don't do that kind of work, but I suspect that that's the kind of work that may be taking place, or might take place once all the water details are figured out.
And I might add to that kind of shows the dilemma that the council had, and I have compassion for them. As Wayne said, he wishes there was no Hawkins at all, but that's not the reality of it. And since I'm in the business, a Walmart watcher, and I think that there's a very good chance, the way Walmart behaves, that there's a very good chance if they build a super center in Pullman, that they'll close the store in Moscow. And I believe that that's what's going to happen in Lewiston. They'll build the super center in Clarkston and close the one in Lewiston. And that's, if you look at what's going on, that's what happened in the Tri-Cities. That's what they do around the country. So there's just really no good scenario. But a better scenario for Moscow, I believe, is to have a super center in the Hawkins development than to have a super center on Bishop Boulevard and have the store in Moscow closed. You know, that's a worse scenario as far as I'm concerned.
Gerard, there's actually a very good follow-up question tied to exactly what you just said, so I'm going to skip ahead to it. Mr. Connolly, you expressed some ambivalence given a choice between a Hawkins development in Pullman versus on the state line. How is this location on the state line preferable to Moscow businesses rather than it being home?
My dad, who's been gone for almost 40 years, but I still remember him very well, always said that it's best to be right next door to your competition. You want to be as close to your competition as you possibly can get. That's why they have auto rows when you go into Spokane or other towns. You want to be in auto row. If you're a car dealership, you want to be right there with the other car dealerships, as close to them as you can get. So from a business standpoint, the closer we can get to our competitors, the better.
I absolutely agree with what Gerard just said. And but I want to see a show of hands. This will be a little bit different here. I'll put the onus on you folks. How many people here are worried, very worried about the downtown business district suffering tremendously from the Hawkins development? Thank you. My dad and mom are sitting in the audience. My dad was on Moscow City Council from 1978 to 1982 when the malls came to Moscow. The exact same fears in downtown Moscow existed at that time. It was going to be the end of downtown Moscow. We were going to be closed up. We were going to have nothing but vacant stores. I hear, and this goes against my grain very much so, I hear so much pessimism. And how do we survive life by being pessimistic? You've got to have optimism. You've got to have fire in your belly. And that's what happened with the people that work downtown and businesses downtown. Sure, some of them moved. And Gerard's absolutely right. Retail space can be replaced with retail space. But we have very few businesses downtown Moscow that are vacant. And this same discussion came up when we were talking about Super Walmart. And I took a walk downtown one afternoon, and I walked up and down Main Street, and I walked up and down 3rd Street. And I tried to identify stores that I thought would be greatly affected to the point of probably being put out of business, or possibly put out of business. And I really saw one store that I thought was going to be affected, because Walmart sells tires, they do lube oil filter work. That was me. My reaction was, bring it on. Bring it on. I had somebody tell me one time that if you own a small business And if you can't figure out a way to compete against a big business, then you probably ought to sell and get a government job. Well, what I have is a government job. Now, just because I'm going to retire here this summer doesn't mean I follow that philosophy at all. Dennis, there's absolutely no way anybody can put you out of business because of what you offer. You are so specialized that there's no corporation that could come in and give, yeah, they can beat your prices, but they can't beat you. They can't beat what you give.
That's a kind of conference.
It's true. And the same thing belongs to Bob Green and book people. I talked to Betsy. She says, I'm really, really worried. I said, why, Betsy? Nobody can do a book people like you do. Sure, there's people that are going to be price shopping. There's going to be customers that are gripers, complainers because you charge too much. But you know what? One thing that I learned a long time ago, you send the bad customers to competition and you take care of the good customers and you really take good care of those customers, and that's how you stay in business for 54 years. Don't be optimistic and you'll lose. Be pessimistic, you'll really lose. Be optimistic. You'll succeed. That's how we succeed in life. That was not really a paid political speech, but
Moscow selling waters to Hawkins makes sense because it prevents Whitman County from building an 8-mile-long sewer wastewater pipe that further development can use. Was limitation of development discussed or considered by the City Council? I can read that again if you like. Was limitation of development discussed or considered by the City Council?
let me help on that a little bit. I think you said limitation, was a limitation discussed? I don't know if discussed was so much the word, but we have to remember that in the agreement, it states that we're going to sell the water, 45 acre feet of water, and this applies to the initial build out of 714,000 square feet. And that's it. Now, if they want to go any bigger than that, they have to figure out a way to use that same water. They don't get any more water. So I suppose to that extent, the limitations was discussed.
I don't think we really discussed it like that. I think what we discussed was the water. You know, we focused on 45, you know, of water that they drill and use versus 45 that we would sell them, plus an additional 20. That's the point. Those are the points that we were discussing.
Who will the Hawkins Development businesses pay taxes to?
Whitman County.
Whitman County.
State of Washington. Right, state of Washington also. They'll pay property taxes in Whitman County and state of Washington.
I think the real question is, are we going to get any? No. That's the rub. I really thought that the best solution was just move the state line about 3 miles west, but I haven't figured out how to do that yet.
The water lives under the Palouse region. What difference, other than management, does it make if the water comes out of a Moscow or Pullman well? And what about regionality?
In terms of water, both sources of water pull from the Grand Rock aquifer. There may be some mixing with the Wanapum at different levels between the two communities, but essentially the water is going to come from the same location. And that's why I think the Washington Department of Ecology felt it necessary to transfer the water rights because they perceive it as the same water. Whether or not the Idaho Department of Water Resources agrees with that and allows us to, well, there's also state law that would influence the IDWR decision. So the water's the same, but I think there's a policy question, which is which is the issue behind my vote against not just the amount of water. Was there a second part of that? In terms of water, I mean, the water that Pullman pumps and water that Moscow pumps, it's all very ancient water that we are pulling out of the water with very little recharge.
Just what about regionality? But
Regionality. Yeah, I think that's to the point of, well, why, there's a state line, who cares if they're doing it on the other side? Why? My issue is not that we shouldn't be working together. I mean, the issue of why I voted against it. The issue is that I don't think financially it makes sense for the city of Moscow. From the perspective of regionality, I think we kind of hurt ourselves. We might be selling more water, we might be getting some hookup fees, but I don't think financially, I don't think we're going to replace potential loss of tax gains, and I also feel like we're not going to replace potential tax losses from business moving across the border. Now, maybe in the long term, who knows? As Gerard has talked about, businesses change, move all the time. I don't think it's necessarily positive.
I'd just like to say, because we're starting to lose our crowd here, that I think all of these questions are just excellent, and it's really too bad that they couldn't have been asked before the council took the vote.
And that's why I made the motion that I did, which was to delay the vote until we could have a chance to discuss all of this.
Which leads me to throw in a question, which can require a short answer. Any ideas why there wasn't a second to your motion, Tom? Not trying to put you on the spot, but it's one of the questions.
Well, I guess to echo what Gerard said, I don't think that there was any malintention by any of the members of the city council, present or past. I think that other city council members just viewed it differently than I did. I just had a different perspective, I think. And I haven't really actually talked about that vote with anybody since then, so I haven't really asked why not or why, so.
This comes back to the tenure of mediation itself. Walter and I both were under the impression, and I'm really glad Walter was there. I'd sure hated to have been there all by myself on this thing, but Walter and I were both under the impression, and I assumed that our mayor was too, but she didn't say anything, that mediation was the name of the game. And I was very much under the impression that the Hawkins representatives were not ready to come back to the table. On the 22nd hour of mediation, when we were discussing the final settlement agreement, came to clause number 7, which is the no challenge agreement. When our idea was we wanted to tighten that up a little bit. And when you see Jeff DeVoe and his attorney sit back in their chair, cross their arms, and they say number 7 stays like it is, that's it. You pretty well understand where they're at. Next thing that Jeff DeVoe did was he closed up his book. And then he reached down under the table and pulled out his briefcase and he started to put things away. This tells me that they're finally getting to the point where they're about done talking. It was interesting because when Walter asked me that about 3 hours later, if I had the same impression that they were about ready to leave the negotiating table, I said, yeah, that kind of surprised me. That was the body language we saw. Now maybe he's really good, and maybe he was just playing a card. I don't know. But I will tell you this. And I'll go back to what I said about when you hire an attorney. Peter Scott specializes in water rights issues. Peter Scott suggested that we had a fair and equitable settlement, and he recommended that we take it. We paid a lot of money for his recommendation, and I thought it was probably a good idea to do. So why didn't, when you made your motion, and why didn't it get seconded? Probably because that would have meant going back to the table and trying to mediate again with them, and I was under the very strong impression that Hawkins Corporation was not going to come back and negotiate any longer.
Perhaps, and I mentioned this to Tom yesterday, it might have worked, and again, you know, we can't press the rewind button, but maybe to move that the decision be tabled. And again, I'm not arguing with the decision that was made, I'm just bringing up the process here. I think that the council was in a tough situation. When it comes to attorneys, I love all the attorneys in this room. I'm reminded of one of the very first business mentors I ever had when I was a teenager, shortly after my dad died. He was a friend of my dad's and a very successful independent retailer from Olympia. And he told me, Sonny, the preacher can marry you, but you got to pick out your own bride. And I took that to mean that it's always a good idea to seek the best advice you can possibly find, legal advice, accounting advice, consultants, and so forth. But don't let those people tell you what to do.
Under number 4 of the settlement agreement, Hawkins agreed to relinquish 2 of its water rights if IDWR, the Idaho Department of Water Resources, approves the offered city water services. Yet, under number 7, there is a no protest clause stating the city shall not directly or indirectly protest, contest, or appeal any permits or governmental approvals sought by Hawkins. Does this mean Hawkins could apply for additional water rights and drill wells, possibly increasing the net amount of water Hawkins can take? If so, how can the council claim that they are controlling the amount of water used?
Also included in that same paragraph, it says anything that is public safety or a nuisance. And I think that we could very well, if they tried to transfer more water rights, claim that it's either public safety or probably a nuisance. The purpose of that was, in my opinion, if they decided that they had a certain type of store that they were going to bring in, they didn't want Moscow filing an appeal against their building rights. But we were very concerned about public safety, and we were very concerned about nuisance. And if they elected to go ahead and put in their wastewater treatment plant, and the placement of their lagoon caused strong odors to come across the state line and come across to where the Mormon Steakhouse is, that would very definitely be a public nuisance. And we could certainly file a grievance against that.
Well, you know, I read that same clause, and you recall hours ago in my opening remarks, I used the word gag order to signify what the city had agreed to, and I still stand by that. That's the Hawkins attorneys were and are the best that money can buy. They're extremely capable. Witness the results here. And they wrote that gag order, and it's a really good one. So, no, I think the city just has to keep its trap shut no matter what goes on over there. And the likely thing where it might want to open its trap, it actually is runoff questions into the South Fork of the Lewis River. That's going to be one of the huge constraints on that mall, is surface runoff. That's a major constraint right now in the river. And so that may be something that Moscow, the city of Moscow would have worried about, but with this kind of language in that clause, we'll just have to shut up and go away. Paradise Creek, I'm sorry, South Fork, South, Right Street.
That's right.
But that still is a major constraint is runoff, with temperature and sediment in it.
I will tell you that the Department of Ecology has even stricter runoff regulations than the state of Idaho has, and they have to comply to that. And I'm going to give you an example. I'm sure everybody is aware that James Toyota is also pulling up stakes and they're moving across the state line. And I was discussing this with Jeff Hill one day about what they have to do. And the state of Washington is so strict on their runoff that the water that they utilize to wash their service bays out and their car wash bays, that water is trapped and trucked out of the area. It's not even allowed to run into Paradise Creek. So the Washington Department of Ecology has extremely strict rules in that regard.
Okay, I'm going to, we still have a pile of questions. We have some restlessness in the audience that there's more questions yet to be asked, so I'm going to start cutting people off, if you don't mind. I'll try to do it very nicely. Tom alluded in his opening remarks to wishing there were more studies done about the economic impacts of the Hawkins development and how it might financially benefit or not benefit Moscow. So we've got several questions here on that topic. So if we could have a mix of answers. Was there any studies done about this, economic studies, anything like that, that the public is unaware of?
I haven't seen any. Sorry?
Hawkins did.
Oh, I'm sure they did, right. It's their thing. In fact, I should back up. If you go to the Hawkins website, hawkinscompanies.com, you can download their plan, their business plan. It talks about the number of people within a certain area and how they will, as a company, benefit from this particular development. They should do quite well.
Are you aware of any studies that were done specifically with water impacts as far as this development?
No.
Yeah, and were there any studies done on other environmental impacts, such as surface runoff or?
No, Whitman County did hold its SEPA hearings, the State Environmental Policy Act. They had a determination of non-significance, DNS, which didn't surprise me. They always have a DNS when there's anything being proposed in Whitman County.
Okay, a little bit different question. The Hawkins development will represent an increase of 1 to 2% of Moscow's water usage. And by getting the water from Moscow, okay, I'm trying to say this in a way that makes sense to me. The city's water right would be superior to maybe water rights of farmers out in the county. And so if we're increasing the amount of water used, is that going to affect water rights for our neighbors who are farmers and so forth out in Latah County?
I think that we pretty clearly learned from our attorney that this is likely the end of water rights. Whether or not DOE will transfer more water rights, I don't know. But it didn't sound likely that more water was going to be made available.
Does this pertain to Washington or Idaho?
This pertains to county farms. Either county.
I don't think Tom's right as far as the state of Washington. They're not looking to transfer any more water rights, at least in Whitman County. But I'll go back to what I was told by Jeff Hill on James Toyota. They can drill their own well, but it's a private consumption well, very low usage. So, so I'm not going to speak to what the Washington state requirements are for residential wells, because I don't know that. But my anticipation would be that if James Toyota, if they can drill a personal consumption well, that probably it doesn't affect that. But I don't know that, so pretend I didn't say it.
I did ask that question about if this is the end of water rights in the border, how is Toyota going to be able to locate? And they're basically already drilled their well, and it's a low consumption well. Which I suspect would be possible for others that would choose to do a similar kind of thing. So limiting of growth in the quarter, I don't know about that. Certainly Poland could sell water from the west, moving towards this direction as well. Speaking of water, could I, speaking of being out of water, could I get some more water?
Just trying to figure out how to make that happen.
You just open up the tap and there it is.
There it is.
One woman named Rosa Parks stood up to segregation. One man named Gandhi stood up to the British Empire in India. Do you think a consumer boycott could stand up to this development, or the city council?
Consumer boycott of the city council? I don't have an answer. Do I think we have the ability to do a consumer boycott of the Hawkins development? I think that's akin to trying to do a boycott against Standard Oil and not buying any gas for 2 days when they go on, the gas prices get so high. I think that's kind of a futile effort. I really don't have an answer for that.
You know, generally, when Walmart goes in, they face opposition. Not always. They go into places, plenty of places where they don't have opposition. But they had opposition in Moscow. They've got opposition in Hayden, and all over the country. There's opposition, and they're willing to hang in there and spend tons of money and a lot of time and go, you know, outspec everybody and outlast everybody. And you might think that with all this opposition, people must hate them and they wouldn't do well. But the reason why they hang in there and spend that amount of money is because in the end, they know when they get that store built, people will go there.
Just a thought on boycotts. We've had some sad talk in this town in the last year on that very subject. And it's bad business. Morally, it's bad business to promote them and to talk about them. It doesn't do anything positive for a town, and that's not an answer out there. People should vote with their feet. I always have. My politics are based on who's going to put money in my pocket, and I apologize for that. So that's a smart thing to do. But trying to launch some boycott or thinking that's a good idea to stop that development that way is not wise and isn't a very good choice morally, in my opinion. In reality, there's going to be a boycott, but it's probably going to be a boycott against a whole lot of retailing. And that's the fact that the current contribution of retail consumption to the GDP in this country is 70%. That's a wildly unsustainable number. It should be about 50% or 55%, which is what all the rest of the world has as that GDP component. The United States is essentially flat broke. Its consumers are, and so is the country as a whole. I suspect the inevitable decline in retailing as a component of GDP, that will be the factor that has the greatest impact on that mall. Unfortunately, it's probably going to have an impact on everybody else too. But retailing is in for a whopper of a decline, and it's going to be a long one, and it's going to be a nightmarish one.
I'd like to say that our business is doing very well. We had a great year in 2006, one of those where, you know, I just didn't want to wake up. I just wanted it to be Groundhog's Day, and every day would be 2006. And 2007 beat that, and we're well ahead of that in 2008. So I'm not pessimistic about the future of retail. I'm very optimistic about it. And also, you know, one of the things I really like about Moscow, and I love this town, there's no place else I'd rather live, is that there's a lot higher percentage of people in Moscow who think about the repercussions of where they spend their money than most towns. And so, you know, I don't know about boycott, but I do know that there's a lot of people in Moscow who think about the repercussions of where they spend their money. And I think that's to the credit of the community, and I appreciate it for one.
Well, I want to second what George's saying, and I think that there's three of us here, and I think, Dennis, I think you're having a good year. One of the people I see, and they're not staggering out of your place either, so that's good. Martin's Auto Service also, we had a very good year last year. The first quarter of this year has been better than the year last. So we continue to move on, and I think it's because as Gerard has, and as Dennis has, and as we have, we found where our niche belongs. We found that customer service is paramount to maintaining your customer base, and increasing your sales, and taking care of business.
Couple more questions for you, if you don't mind. It is illegal for Moscow to profit on water Moscow sells. The council has said they can charge Hawkins a premium price for water. How does the council justify charging Hawkins a premium price when Moscow can only charge what it costs to deliver water?
One of the things you have to remember that when you put together the Moscow City budget, the budget is not put together like a business budget. When you have a business, you put together a depreciation schedule, depreciate your schedule, depreciate your equipment out. You cannot do that as a public entity, but you do that as capital improvement projects. And you can utilize this money to repair the system that you have, to improve the system that you have, and you're not making a profit. You make a profit if you have money left over at the end of the year. If that money is put back into structure, if it's put back in equipment, that's not a profit, it's an investment in your future. Therefore, that's how Moscow can justify the increased water and sewer rates.
All right. This one is specifically addressed to you, Wayne. We have heard from council members that they went into mediation to avoid litigation costs. How much would it cost to allow the appeals to run their course and see what the decisions were before making the decision to go into mediation?
It comes down to the process as we understood it. We understood that the next process beyond mediation was litigation. We were explained that we could expect to spend a minimum of $100,000 if we went into litigation with, I don't know what the percentage was, but a very low percentage of actually winning. And I'm going to tell you that we have been requested to spend and to put $100,000 into the partnership fund for workforce housing. Fair and Affordable Housing Commission will be coming to us, and they're going to be asking for $15,000 or better to apply towards affordable housing. I will tell you that I will not spend your tax money on something like $100,000 in litigation if I don't think we have an excellent chance of coming back a winner, because your tax money needs to be spent in areas that benefits this community, and that especially applies to workforce housing and affordable housing.
Anybody else?
It's kind of a follow-up.
Why the rush? The city of Moscow was only involved in an administrative appeal to the Pollution Control Hearings Board, parentheses, which is not an expensive process and could have been dropped at any time. This appeal was not a lawsuit.
Well, I'll have to go back to what we understood as the process. And the process was we had one chance at mediation. Hawkins was willing to come to the table and hammer out an agreement. My impression, and I believe Walter's impression, was that's what we had. That was our time to do it. If we declined to do mediation at that time, Hawkins was willing to carry forth. Once again, I'll say that I believe that Hawkins has a whole lot more money than Moscow has, and I can tell you that they had close to $1.5 million invested in that piece of ground right now without even purchasing it. So they weren't going to let that go. They could go as far as it took. How far were we willing to go? If we were going to have one chance at mediation, it was my impression that that was the time to do it and try to get the best benefit from Moscow that we can, because the water's all coming out of the same pond. We might as well get paid for it.
I didn't think there was a rush. I thought we had all the time in the world really to make a decision that would be best for the city of Moscow and the people in the city. I perceived that there was more time to spend. Now, the agreement, the settlement agreement, the only time reference in there, well, that's not true. We were obligated to do things in a timely fashion once the agreement was enacted, but there was a reference of time is of the essence, which is a typical phrase in legal agreement. But that to me didn't mean that we needed to do something on that particular day. I thought we could have easily said, nope, we're not going to do this right now, we're going to spend some time with the decision. It was my opinion, and I don't think it was shared by the other council members, that the decision that we were making by selling them water was quite a bit more significant than whether or not there was an appeal or not. That whether or not, it just seemed to me to be too big of a gift to switch. The fact that we're making that big of a policy decision, it was too much of a risk, too much of a negative for us to give away the public respect and just the ability to decide how we wanted to move forward as a community. To make that decision rather than just taking the time, I wasn't willing to do. And that's why I made the motion and voted against it.
I wish that we could have had, I'm sorry, I'm going to take a shot at this. Wish we could have had the entire council at the mediation session, because I think we would have come back with a lot more solid agreement amongst ourselves. I understand what Tom's saying, and I certainly appreciate what he's saying, but the feeling that I received and why I felt that it was time to make the decision was the feeling that I got out of the context of mediation itself. When you sign a mediation agreement, you say that you are willing to bargain in good faith. And that's what we were doing. And I did not have the feeling that we had the option to come back and discuss it publicly. And I'm not sure what we could have discussed publicly, considering the fact that we had to sign a confidentiality agreement. So if we didn't sign the confidentiality agreement, turn around and come home and move on to litigation. It was unfortunately pretty black and white at that time. Now that being said, one of the great things about moving on through life and getting older is we learn our lessons and we become a little bit wiser in some of our choices. I'm not saying that I wouldn't make the same choice again, but I'm saying that the educational process has been great, and were I put into that situation again, I would have a lot more questions that I would ask that I did not ask at that particular time.
Why wasn't the entire council at the mediation? And how was the number of council members allowed determined?
Well, the JOB, just like I said, when it was brought up that the mayor would like to have at least one council person go with her. John Weber has a job up in Sandpoint. Bill Lambert has a job. He has a wife he needs to take care of. Tom Lamar had appointments put together, and he couldn't get away. Dan Herskowin could not get away. Walter Steed could not get away. He'd get away for one day, but he didn't think he'd get away for 2 days. This is a slower period of time at our store, and I felt that, okay, I guess I'll go. I really wasn't that excited about it. Being a freshman council person, I thought maybe an experienced person should go. But I guess I drew the short straw. Walter did come, and Walter was able to reschedule himself so he could be there for 2 days. But that's the reason. And you know, yeah, this is a real high-paying government job, folks. I guarantee you. But we have to work for a living too, and it gets in the way of some of the other important things that we try to do for the city. I would ask you to remember one thing: none of us are professional politicians. We're working people, we're residents just like you are. We don't have an axe to grind. We're trying to make the best decisions that we can, that we think benefits the entire community, not necessarily just a small sector.
I have to say, appreciate everyone's compliance with our little rules set up here, so saying that, you can go ahead with the next question.
Why wasn't it rescheduled if only one person could attend?
I don't know. Well, the dates were set. It was next week, right? I mean, I'll have to ask Nancy this. I mean, is that something could we have decided we needed 3 or 4 council people and we could have rescheduled it?
Could have tried, could have asked.
We could have done that?
You could have said no mediation. You had all kinds of options at that point.
But could we have did we have an opportunity to change the dates and move it to later on down the road?
Well, the judge has established that date.
The judge has said it, I know.
Available, but if you.
I don't have a good answer for that. My impression was Monday and Tuesday, or Tuesday and Wednesday, whatever it was, those are the dates, that's where we're going, the judge is gonna be there, everybody's flying in. I guess when there's a court appearance, we can't call this really a court appearance, but to me, it was a legal proceeding, and when they say, you gotta be there, you gotta be there.
Is there a possibility that the two municipalities, Moscow and Pullman, could get together and plan for the corridor rather than reacting to private developers' needs?
The problem is the corridors in Whitman County. Whitman County's not interested in planning anything with anybody. If you watch the Whitman County Commission at work, that's reasonably obvious. So I think Moscow and Pullman could whistle all they wanted to, and no one in Colfax would pay the slightest heed to them.
There are a number of problems that set this up in the first place. There's the Washington State tax law that basically says that Whitman County doesn't really benefit, in my opinion, they should, when development happens in Pullman. So they're in the position of saying, well, the only way we're going to really boost our tax rolls is to push development in the corridor. There was a Whitman County commissioner that was quoted a few months ago saying, well, the corridor is our economic engine. As long as they see it that way, and not Pullman is our economic engine, Colfax is our economic engine, St. John's our economic engine, Colton, all of these places. In my opinion, the county should be trying to help the cities do better. And if the county is in competition with the cities, then we all lose. Pullman loses, Moscow's going to lose, but they don't need to pay. They don't need to care about Moscow. We're on the other side of the state line. Secondly, the highway that the Department of Transportation built between Pullman and Moscow, now it's going to be, in the short term, I think, much safer. It's a lot nicer. Any of us that have driven back and forth know how much safer we feel driving on that. However, it's a 5-lane highway. It's built as a road that can be accessed from virtually any point along the roadway. It's intended to be that kind of a highway that will be accessed. In the long term, if the corridor develops the way Whitman County commissioners want it to develop, then we won't have the same kind of quick transfer between the two communities that we do right now. That's going to affect class schedules for both WSU and the University of Idaho. It's going to affect commute times from Moscow resident, or from people who are now choosing to live in Moscow but work in Pullman. That may affect where they choose to live in the future. I don't know if Schweitzer people are going to continue to want to live in Moscow if the commute time increases a lot more. I don't know. Maybe they will. I certainly wouldn't want to live in Moscow. That's okay. I can say that. I'm a city council member. And then, of course, I think the Department of Ecology, Washington Department of Ecology, is part to blame for transferring the water rights that I think they shouldn't have transferred. I think that the findings that our attorney provided to the Washington Department of Ecology was quite an eye-opening for the Washington Department of Ecology. And I think that if they could have done it over again, they probably wouldn't have transferred those water rights. And Colton placed themselves in an unfortunate situation by tying their water right transfers to the Hawkins development. And of course, as you know, Colton was concerned about our appeal of those water rights. So there were a number of governments that all had a part to play in this and to set it up. And then, of course, that Monday morning, Whitman County said, oh yeah, sure, we'll go ahead and float $9.1 million to help build this thing. And I think that that may have played some pressure in the hurry up, let's do something right now. I don't know. It didn't affect me. I didn't care. I wasn't going to support this because we needed to have more process, in my opinion. And again, I've stated that before. I didn't want to see Moscow as a city government join the other governments in making bad planning decisions. And so, again, this is my personal opinion, and that's where I'm basing my level of judgment on this. Whether or not the state of Idaho also joins these other governments in allowing this to take place, I don't know. That permit's going to be filed with the state of Idaho, Idaho Department of Water Resources, and we, as citizens in Idaho, have an opportunity to voice our opinion with the state when they make that decision.
John, is there going to be a hearing on that?
I am not actually sure what the process is going to be. I understand that we will be making a permit application, and I understand that it's a public process, but I haven't been told yet what the steps are going to be in making that determination. Ultimately, the determination is made by the director of the Department of Water Resources, but I don't know how he will assign that responsibility to other staff members or which offices are going to conduct that process. So it's uncertain to me how that's going to happen. I think I answered the points.
Does the Hawkins agreement include payment of impact fees?
No.
Like those?
And I did ask that last week. We had a meeting about impact fees as being proposed in the city of Moscow, and as you may know, the city of Moscow is considering adopting a policy of impact fees within the city limits. And those impact fees, whether or not they happen or not, if we did have a policy of impact fees, they would be triggered by building permits as applied to by development within Moscow. Hawkins will not come to the city of Moscow to get building permits, and so there will be no triggering of impact fees. The question that I had was, can we assess an impact fee for the wastewater that we would be receiving from them? And I was told pretty clearly that no, that's not a possibility. Incidentally, the agreement that we made will probably save somebody, whether it's Hawkins or Whitman County, because they're doing their floating of the bonds to help support the infrastructure. It'll save somebody in Whitman County several millions of dollars if they take us up on both water and sewer. So one of the questions I asked was, or in my mind was, if we're going to save them $2 to $4 million or $2 to $5 million, whatever it might be, are we helping to provide a better ability for that mall or that shopping center, whatever it might be, to lower their rents to help attract business into that space? So I don't know the answer to that question, but it's a question I had. We don't have the workings for that to be able to make the decision that I would like to be able to make. And that's, again, why I said no.
Well, let's not forget, though, that if they were to be saved $2 million in infrastructure costs because they didn't build a wastewater treatment plant, that over a period of time, that money would be paid to the city of Moscow. If we ultimately end up charging them $100,000 to $200,000 a year over a 5-year period of time, that's going to add up. So I'm not so sure that they're saving all that much money. Possibly the taxpayers of Whitman County might be saving that kind of money, but.
Folks, it's getting late. While I can't speak for the folks in the hot seat, I know I badly need my beauty rest. So we've narrowed it down to 3 last questions, and then we'll be done for the night. So, without further ado. If all the Hawkins developers need to do to secure water is to threaten to sue, what is to prevent other developers to do the same thing for more development on the corridor?
Tell you right now, if another developer decides to put up another shopping center, and by some manner, they find a way to transfer water rights, that there is certainly going to be a lot of public input from the people of Moscow before we make any decision whether we want to appeal or not.
Probably for good reasons. It was fear of the cost of litigation that caused us to sin here. And that we set a precedent in that sense, that the unwillingness, and maybe for very good reasons, of the city of Moscow to spend a lot of money on legal costs, on water issues, that set a precedent. And I think there really is a danger that other folks demanding city services outside the city, making the question of Whitman County, but right here in Lake County, a mile or two north of town, it's going, and I said in my introductory remarks, it's going to be very, very hard to say no to those people. To tell them we just don't have enough water, or your contribution to our sewer system isn't adequate financially. It's going to be very difficult. And when the threat of litigation arises as in that process, and it will, there will be. And so we've set kind of a bad precedent here. Maybe for good reasons, but a bad precedent nonetheless.
Spoke with Gary Greener about that. The only people that we are required to supply water and sewer to are people within the city limits of Moscow. If we supply services outside the city limits, it's at our discretion, and there's not a precedent set.
So why do we do it?
What?
So why do we do it? We are only required to do it. These are the reasons that are.
Next question. Where is the protection for Moscow? It appears that when the wells run dry, Moscow is on the hook for 65 acre feet that we will have to buy and truck in.
Well, that's a scenario that obviously none of us want to see. But if the aquifer goes dry and we no longer have any water, we're all going to move anyway, and there's not going to be anybody to sue.
That's optimism.
Yeah, that's an obvious question, obvious answer.
So that's optimism. Yeah.
All right. Last question, and you can all go ice your throats. Looking at the big picture, what did we gain? What did we lose?
What did we gain? We gained the elimination of a new well in the Grand Ronde Aquifer. We gained the retirement of 2 existing water rights. We gained no net increase in withdrawals from the Grand Ronde Aquifer. In fact, feedback in some cases says there may be a possible net decrease. We also gained the control of the monitoring of the water going to the Hawkins development as opposed to a private entity controlling their own water usage. We have Hawkins voluntarily dismissing their appeal of water right number 6030, which was the Jones water right. This was a transfer of surface water right that does not get changed to the Wanapum Aquifer. Under reclaimed water, should Hawkins decide to receive wastewater treatment from Moscow, there's the potential to have Hawkins pay for upgrades within the Moscow system and buy reclaimed water from Moscow, which would be an additional revenue source. We received a conservation commitment from Hawkins Company in the fact that their landscaping will be xeriscaping. What did we lose? We lost out on the fact that there's a 714,000 square foot subdivision development that's going to be going across on the other side of the state line. We're not going to receive any tax revenues. We're not going to receive any sales tax. And there's one other thing that hasn't been brought up that will happen. Businesses in the Hawkins development will have to pay the prevailing Washington state wage law, which is, what, 8.15? 8 something, substantially higher than Idaho.
793.
There's not going to be a bunch of people move into Moscow for the privilege of working in the Hawkins development. they're going to be competing for the same employment labor base that we already compete for at higher wages. Seems to me that means that Bosco businesses are also going to have to raise their starting pay to be competitive with what the Hawkins development is going to pay. The city has been talking about a livable wage. Granted, minimum pay in the state of Washington is not a livable wage, but it is higher than what we have here in Bosco. Does that have a benefit? It's a benefit to the people who work there, but it's also a cost of doing business. The cost of doing business is passed on to the consumer. There's pluses and minuses. Our vote was what we considered would be the best for the entire city of Moscow. Our mayor worked just as hard as we did those 22 and a half hours. She didn't quite get what she thought we needed to have. But I feel that we got the best deal that we could get, given the circumstances, the conditions that we thought we had. And I think Moscow in the long run will come out with a benefit. As I said, if I had my choice, they wouldn't even be there. That's not my choice. That's not our choice.
Well, I think we gained a large water customer. And we lost, or lost, I think, potentially some businesses across the state line, although we don't know that yet. I think probably the biggest thing we lost was just respect and confidence of Moscow voters. And that's probably the part that feels the hardest for me. And, you know, that night when we voted, I felt pretty ill. I told a lot of people just individually that I just didn't feel very good that night. I just went home, walked home. And I still feel badly that I wasn't able to convince others to see it the way that I saw it. And I tried, but I didn't succeed in that.
Well, we inadvertently gained the Washington minimum wage in Moscow, which from a small business owner has no impact. I mean, we pay all of our employees a lot more than that, but from a lot of business standpoint, that may not be a gain, actually. But if you're a college student or a part-time worker in Moscow, the arrival of the Washington minimum wage 100 feet from stores that haven't been used to paying that will be a boon, and that's probably good. We didn't gain any sales tax revenue. We're likely, I think, this is certainly speculation, but we're likely over the next few years to lose sales tax revenue in town as business shifts to Washington State. So that falls into the category of loss. In the 30 or 35 years I've been watching Moscow city government, this is about the only time I can think of where I really had and have a genuine loss of faith in how our government is functioning in this town. And that I would have to count as a really big loss, and a worrisome one. It didn't used to be, to my way of thinking, that you had to keep an eye on the city council. And that's changed. That's why I said at the start, I hope something that comes out of this is not this process that was used for Hawkins being viewed at, yeah, we got away with that. It's a green light for a whole lot more of those kind of dealings. If that's the case, then they've just driven the stake right into the heart of this whole town. If instead, this is viewed as, crap, we really screwed up this time and we're not going to do that again, this will be the last secret agreement we've reached with developers or with anybody, we're never doing this again, then maybe that will come up on the positive side of all this. I sure hope so.
Well, as I've said before, I don't think there's really any good scenario here realistically. I mean, idealistically, you you could conjure up some nice positive scenario, but I think in reality, it's a free country, it's a free market, it's private enterprise, and the only two realistic scenarios were that either the big boxes are going to locate on Bishop Boulevard, or they're going to locate in the Hawkins development. And from a business standpoint, I have to think that Moscow is better off having them as close to Moscow as we can get them than on Bishop Boulevard. And so I have some sympathy for the council. I think they were in a real tough position, and I've already said that I think the process was too speedy, and the opportunity for public comment was woefully inadequate.
All right, folks, thank you for coming tonight. I do believe